Hello and welcome to the AI Engineering Podcast, your guide to the fast-moving world of building scalable and maintainable AI systems. When ML teams try to run complex workflows through traditional orchestration tools, they hit walls. Cash App discovered this with their fraud detection models. They needed flexible compute, isolated environments, and seamless data exchange between workflows, but their existing tools couldn't deliver. That's why Cash App relies on Prefect. Now their ML workflows run on whatever infrastructure each model needs across Google Cloud, AWS, and Databricks. Custom packages stay isolated. Model outputs flow seamlessly between workflows. Companies like Whoop and 1Password also trust Prefect for their critical workflows, but Prefect didn't stop there. They just launched FastMCP, production-ready infrastructure for AI tools. You get Prefect's orchestration plus instant OAuth, serverless scaling, and blazing fast Python execution. Deploy your AI tools once, connect to Claude, Cursor, or any MCP client. No more building auth flows or managing servers. Prefect orchestrates your ML pipeline. FastMCP handles your AI tool infrastructure. See what Prefect and FastMCP can do for your AI workflows at aiengineeringpodcast.com/prefect today. Unlock the full potential of your AI workloads with a seamless and composable data infrastructure. Bruin is an open-source framework that streamlines integration from the command line, allowing you to focus on what matters most, building intelligent systems. Write Python code for your business logic and let Bruin handle the heavy lifting of data movement, lineage tracking, data quality monitoring, and governance enforcement. With native support for ML and AI workloads, Bruin empowers data teams to deliver faster, more reliable, and scalable AI solutions. Harness Bruin's connectors for hundreds of platforms, including popular machine learning frameworks like TensorFlow and PyTorch. Build end-to-end AI workflows that integrate seamlessly with your existing tech stack. Join the ranks of forward-thinking organizations that are revolutionizing their data engineering with Bruin. Get started today at aiengineeringpodcast.com/Bruin, and for dbt Cloud customers, enjoy a $1,000 credit to migrate to Bruin Cloud. Your host is Tobias Macy, and today I'm interviewing Preeti Shukla about the process for identifying whether and how to add agentic capabilities to your SaaS platform. So, Preeti, can you start by introducing yourself?
Absolutely, Tobias. Thank you so much for having me today. It's my pleasure. A little bit about myself. I'm a product and engineering leader with 20 years building and scaling B2B and enterprise-grade products, mostly SaaS products. I have led products and teams across three major transitions of the industry. I started my career in on-premise enterprise SaaS, moved on to SaaS products, and then off late, more recently, I've been working on GenAI and agentic products, navigating teams and products into navigating this very transitional time of our industry. And that's the lens I bring to this conversation today.
And in that context, what was your introduction into this overall space of AI and just some of the background that you bring to your perspective on it?
Absolutely. So I got little exposure to classical machine learning. When I was an engineering leader at Workday, we were building financial applications and working on credit scoring for the customers. But this was mostly pre-AI era 2015. I would say that I really immersed myself into AI when I did my own startup, which was an AI-powered a two-sided platform, and that's where we actually built a recommendation engine. So I think that was my first AI native experience when it comes to building the products. And after that, I have had opportunities to lead various traditional SaaS, enterprise and B2B companies into mostly GenAI and agentic products.
And so, in this context of SaaS platforms, obviously SaaS really iconified maybe the past 15 years worth of internet-focused business. And I'm wondering if you can talk to some of the ways that the introduction of agentic capabilities and AI-powered features just changes the requirements around the technical considerations.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, something to understand about SaaS businesses, which most of us do, is they operate under certain constraints and expectations. SaaS fundamentally is a delivery model, and you basically deliver the same software in a repetitive fashion at scale to multiple customers. And certain SaaS artifacts and metrics like service level agreements, pricing tiers, MRR, churn, those things become really important. And that's what differentiates SaaS businesses from traditional softwares. An AI agent thus has to operate within those bounds. If for example, if an agent is displaying high latency behavior, that will directly and negatively impact the SLAs that SaaS provider has committed to its customer. Similarly, if an agent is mixing variable compute on a fixed subscription, that will again negatively impact the unit economics of the SaaS itself. So I would say, just to sum that up, considering both business and technical considerations, latency, cost, customer satisfaction, data privacy, tenant isolation. These are some of the core traits of what an AI agent has to deliver at a very high level in order to be instrumental when it comes to being a core feature of the AI SaaS business products.
If I can characterize the overall space of SaaS, which is a very broad range, I would say that some of the key elements are economies of scale and the ability to rapidly deploy changes without having to wait for the distribution of physical media that was the hallmark of the 90s and early 2000s, where you had to wait until you get a new CD to install the latest version of whatever the system is, and being more subscription based versus a flat fee for purchase of a physical medium. And with the fact that these businesses do focus a lot on that unit economics of delivery for that software, how does the introduction of agentic capabilities and agentic use cases change those ROI calculations, particularly given the highly variable nature of a lot of these generative AI systems?
Absolutely. That's a great question. And I'm going to start by saying that at the intersection of AI agents and SaaS, we are seeing very interesting pricing already. SaaS was long known for seat based pricing that gave SaaS providers very predictable revenue. What has happened of late is we are seeing variations on those pricing, outcome based pricing, credit based pricing. These are really AI agent introduction, or I would say like transformation of the traditional SaaS pricing. And it is necessary. If we think from a business ROI, and if I put it very simply, the total cost of all the features and or workflows that a SaaS provider is providing to a customer should not exceed the subscription price that customer is paying to the SaaS provider. And it was kind of simple, relatively simpler to price that model and to get that predictable revenue on a monthly and an annual basis. But now what has happened is the point I was alluding to before. There is a lot of mixing between variable compute. So if your workflow really involves model calls, which they almost always do, so now we are talking about a variable compute, and we have to be very careful when we do cost estimation and to ensure that agents are not outcosting the unit economics itself.
Another factor of relying on model providers specifically is that it brings with it a certain amount of platform risk, where you're depending on the capabilities of that system to deliver on its functionality for you to be able to serve your customers. And so, particularly large and technically forward companies will maybe opt to self-host some of those models, or for purposes of being able to bring it in for fine tuning and drive some of those costs down or improve the predictability of cost. And I'm wondering what you're seeing as some of the tactical elements of how companies are thinking about that question of which models should I be using, which providers should I be relying on, and how do I develop some of that confidence in the capabilities of that model, particularly if you're using one of the hosted providers such as Anthropic, OpenAI, Google, where the actual model might change under the covers without you knowing it, because they're not necessarily going to advertise every incremental update.
I guess there are two ways I look at it. So there are two frameworks that can be applied. One is most widespread, is segmenting the market based on what kind of SaaS businesses they are, and that roughly correlates to the kind of use cases they have. So I'm talking in terms of B2C SaaS, B2B SaaS, enterprise SaaS. So, and that roughly correlates to B2C SaaS having simpler workflows, mostly Gen I dominated. And of course, there are exceptions, but in this really, like easier to understand framing, we really correlate B2B and enterprise SaaS with more complexity. So B2C SaaS at the lower spectrum, more Gen I dominated, where frontier models do great. Frontier models will continue to do great on those. There is not really a lot of requirement to fine tune those, prompt, a well written production prompt with a few short learning, many short learning, those kind of things still help. But when we are talking about B2B SaaS and enterprise SaaS, that's where complexity comes. You are talking about multi-agent, complicated orchestration, more token utilization that really skyrockets the cost, governance and compliance, and these complex workflows and scenarios, they really call for more sophisticated strategies on which models to use, whether to self host, and usually it is use case driven. If your workflow requires anything with respect to natural language processing, still frontier models do great, but there are techniques to use cheaper models for classification or for labeling. So there is capability routing based on the capability of the model itself. There are other techniques like RAG, such that your prompt doesn't become too bloated. You can ground your agentic behavior in your enterprise documents. So I think those are some of the strategies. And observability and evaluation strategies, they continue. I guess we are going to hear more and more about them. I'm already hearing a lot in tech circles, conversations, that I'm part of in big conferences. Everybody is talking about evaluations and guardrails. Irrespective of the workflow complexity, for any production grade software, observability platforms are playing a big instrumental role in helping providers navigate these challenges. And real quick, I said there are two frameworks. So the other framework that I will quickly talk about is irrespective of the market segmentation, what is the complexity of the automation itself? And we can think about rule-based automation, the simple automation. And then the next is intelligent automation. So now give your automation some brains, give that LLM some memory, some tools, and that is going to deliver a lot of value over a rule-based automation. And then really the third frontier is self autonomous agents, which, as all of us know, they are yet to be seen deployed widely on production. So really the sweet spot is B2B SaaS, medium complexity, intelligent automation that most production agents are capable of.
And there's also a wide degree of variability in terms of the presentation of those agents, where some of them might be something where it's a chat focused interaction where I, as a customer of the SaaS platform, am going to go and maybe there's some text input or some document upload capability that will then trigger a workflow versus an agentic capability that is entirely invisible to me as a customer, but facilitates the operation of the platform and maybe powers some of the actual feature set that I am interacting with, but I don't know that it's necessarily an agentic loop that's running in the background to perform those activities. And I'm wondering how you're seeing SaaS systems determine what are the integration points and exposure points that are most useful for agentic use cases, and whether and when to expose that to the customer versus keeping it internal, and some of the trade-offs of those decisions as far as the appearance of being sophisticated and capable versus preventing the customer from getting stuck in the heightened expectations of, oh, well, they have an AI, so that means they can do anything.
Absolutely. I would say that the most successful transformations I've seen are that start with internal adoption first, and then moving it on to making them customer facing features, as we serve them in a SaaS bundle. But I think companies that are embracing AI culture first, they also adopt AI the first, and that kind of brings everybody on the board, leadership, sponsors, teams, leaders. And when they have really worked, especially with AI agents, they very well know the limitations of it, and I think that helps them empathize when we will be ready to really make it into a customer facing feature. So I think that's really the first step that I've seen. First, internal adoption happens, and then when customer adoption happens, and even when it comes to customer adoption or even internal adoption for that matter, there are some low hanging fruits, as we were talking about. Again, going back to the complexity or using a B2C kind of simpler side of the spectrum, chatbot, maybe one agent is good enough because it's just one workflow that you need, and it's a simple workflow. And then, one agent with good enough capabilities, with some simple memory management and having tool access like Gmail, Gcal, a note taker is good enough. But when it again comes to more complex use cases, that's where my recommendation is that it's good to start with a graduated autonomy, when it comes to rolling out AI agentic features. Use cases that are well known and documented, use cases that have actually proven ROI on the production, those are the ones we start with, be it internal or be it SaaS. And they are usually in level 1 and 2 automation, like intelligent automations. But and then gradually moving it on to like the more complex use cases where you might need more R&D focus. I'll also, take this moment to something that I hear a lot. What is the perfect use case for when not to use AI agent? Because we are kind of in discussing that. So I think one thing is like even before we get into what are the use cases of AI agent, I think we need to do a binary check whether we need AI agents for that or not. So unless your workflow is really multi-step, repetitive, needs autonomy, and has a clear goal, that's where an AI agent consideration makes sense. There are some examples where your classical there are some use cases where your classical ML will continue to do just fine, if you're talking about prediction, time series forecasting, classical ML will continue to do well there. If you're talking about a Gen I, natural language processing like extraction, summarization, and that doesn't have any complex workflow, just do that. Of course, Gen I capabilities continue to work fine. And then really when it comes to multiple flow, multi-step, repetitive steps where you need autonomy, that's where you really consider AI agents. And once you have established that, then there are various use cases on what models to use, what use cases to pick.
For companies that are incorporating some of these AI focused use cases, particularly with these generative AI platforms, what are some of the ways that you are seeing them address some of that confidence building where you mentioned they might start as an internal proof of concept, but what are the signals that what are the signals that let them know that this is ready to actually put in front of customers and expose and advertise around, and some of the ways that they need to change some of their operational maturity around things like testing and evaluation beyond just the ability to run a software system because of the fact that these AI platforms are so dramatically different from traditional software of I can run a web application and keep it stable and scalable. Now I need to make sure that it's actually able to sustain the load of non-human entities interacting with it.
Yes, absolutely. So the challenge is really AI agents in a SaaS context are expected to display deterministic behavior while they are, like undeterministic. And I think there are a few things that a team have to do groundwork upon. Will this SaaS flow respect the latency? Will this flow respect the unit economics? And most importantly, the technical aspect of reliability and predictability. And there are certain strategies as we talk evaluation, so what I'm seeing is that teams are really experimenting with a layered evaluation strategy approach. So it's not just one score, or it's not just one test that you embed in your CI/CD pipeline, but there is whole evaluation engineering. And like to be more specific about that, there are deterministic checkpoints as part of evaluation at the base level: schema validation, policy validation, really the cheap ones. low-cost test, and then moving on to more advanced outcome-based test, golden data sets. So these are the standard data sets that will help catch any regressions, because model changes, workflow changes, but these are standards that will always ensure that you are getting same expected output over a period of time. One more strategy I've seen is when fuzzy logic is involved, LLM as a judge. So let's say you have a chatbot and you have to monitor what's the performance of it or when it is safe to roll out to customers. And I'm assuming that all of this is done in pilot first, so you have a POC first, but then you have a pilot with one or two beta tenants before you really roll it out to production. So when it's still in pilot phase where you have access to some real tenanted data, these are the evaluations and checks. So these LLM as judges are really your confidence scoring. And when your confidence score drops below a certain percentage, like it's not 80% anymore, that's where you bring human in the loop. So I guess there are various layered evaluation strategies. There are also techniques that talk about running offline evaluations in the CI/CD pipeline, but also more runtime evaluations while the customer is using production. And again, observability platform, they play a big role. So I would say really the decision comes down to when is your AI pilot implementation passing your cutoffs or benchmarks that you have set via these evals and guardrails.
And build versus buy is the perennial challenge in technology. I'm curious what your thoughts are on that equation for teams that are planning on implementing an agentic capability in their SaaS platform. Should they just buy an off the shelf system that handles a lot of the RAG and evaluation and LLM serving and load balancing around that so that they can just plug in their system and get some of the out of the box behaviors? Or because of the fact that maybe it is a business critical capability, is that worthwhile having your own team own the end to end capability? And maybe what are the gradations along that continuum?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the debate has been there since long, even pre-AI, whether you build or you buy a product. And I think I kind of agree to how you framed your question. And, that had kind of answer to that as well. It all comes down to business capability. If this is something that is truly tied to ROI of your SaaS business, that is core part of your business or core workflow of your business, that's where you should build it. And something which is infrastructure related, something which is peripheral in nature, like a vector database. There are so much work happening. There are cloud providers also that continue to offer newer AI infrastructure that will help SaaS softwares improve their capabilities over a period of time. So I think that's the general guidance that still hold true in my opinion. So, it comes down to what is the business capability. Now, I will also say that there are some exceptions to it, and we are talking about enterprises that work with federal data or government data, and they have to work in more stricter, like more stringent compliance laws, regulations laws, data residency, or they have a military contract, so they have to operate under certain constraints that might kind of make building a better choice for them. But for most of us, for the rest of us, that guidance on build versus buy still hold true.
And then the other piece of this too is that AI systems are very data hungry, and that requires a separate set of technical and operational maturity for being able to manage a lot of those data flows. And many businesses, particularly if they're on the smaller end of the spectrum, aren't necessarily going to invest in headcount for data engineers and AI engineers, in addition to the software engineers that are focused on the core product delivery. And I'm wondering how you're seeing teams address some of that increased operational maturity requirement to be able to provide all of the data and context to these AI systems to make sure that they're able to operate effectively and have appropriate grounding for the operations that they're providing.
Absolutely. So data is the real mode in AI era. I think we have learned this that the data continue, and this also comes down to which company is going to run with a successful AI product. As they say, garbage in, garbage out. So if teams don't have access to right, sanitize, accurate data, that means they have to do work on the data pipeline first, because AI doesn't really fix workflows that are already broken, or workflows that don't operate with good data. So I think that's definitely there. If companies have access, so there are various startups, so I'm going to first talk about startups, because that might be more challenging for startups who are new AI comers. They might have access to data. In some cases, they don't have access to data. So either they're operating as an AI infra startup, or they are operating as a SaaS application, where they are using existing frontier models for their use cases. So I would say that the way AI infra providers have enabled startups during the cloud era, they will continue to do that. But again, it comes down to individual use cases. For a very small startup for which they really don't need to own AI infra, and they can operate off, let's say, data provided by Apple Watches. Let's say they are a consumer apps. So I think they have to abide by data privacy laws, but I think they can still work with this big ecosystem where there are enablers, like AI providers or big four companies that have access to the data. And then the second type we are talking about is companies that themselves are like an AI data platform company, So that's where they have to do more rigor on making sure that they have the right resources to sanitize the data, get the right team structure for promoting that AI data before they can really incorporate that as an AI product.
And then, as a corollary to that data requirement, is the challenge of I've seen it phrased as the confident idiot, where the AI will very certainly give you an answer that is unequivocally wrong, but if it passes it off with enough confidence, then people will accept that as wrong, and that can lead to a lot of problems. And what are some of the ways that you're seeing teams try to address that challenge and identify some of these confident falsehoods and steer the AIs in the appropriate direction? And because of the fact that that is a never ending battle, what are some of the systems that they need to have in place to be able to identify and correct those decision making steps that the AI might lead you down the wrong path towards?
Absolutely. And I would say like those are the most dangerous ones, the silent failures or the most confident failures that just catch teams off guard. What I've seen working is that there is definitely the implementation part of that, then there's a validation part of that, and then monitoring. So if you really break down into implementation versus validation versus monitoring, then there are certain tried and tested strategies that work. I think we can start with the basics like a good, well written production grade prompt. I think that at the base level ensures that your AI solution doesn't hallucinate. Breaking down instructions, breaking down prompt still works. I think that's still a very effective strategy. What I encourage my engineers to do is, and I do it myself, is like go read production level prompts. And I think it needs some training, because sometimes task appears very simple, like summarize this data. But when you really think through that, and when you start observing agentic behavior or LLM behavior, you will start to see a pattern of the mistake it does, and then you might want to give it a structure. Summarize this in 4 sections, talk about an introduction, then talk about a hook, and then end with the conclusion. So I think I highly encourage that. It's a low hanging fruit, it still works effectively. Second, I would say, is more for B2B SaaS and enterprise grade software. RAG is number one. I still believe it to be number one most effective technique when it comes to grounding AI output into truth. So you can have your enterprise policy documents, you can have your HR policy documents, customer success. It could also be something very specific to your domain, like a medical chatbot or like a legal chatbot. I think they can definitely be given loads of information that can be fed. So I think these 2 or 3 strategies really help minimize hallucination. Now we all know that that's not enough at this point of time, because AI solutions are still improving, and that's where validation comes into the picture. And I guess all the evaluation strategies that I was sharing with you before, they play a crucial role. And as I was saying, there are various sophisticated ways of grading an output. You can use LLM as a judge, you can use golden data sets, you can also do path evaluation. I think this one specifically because you said the confident ones. So, the confident ones and the most tricky ones to capture are the ones that slowly improve the latency. They are those agents or those AI solutions are doing multiple retries, and they might end up giving you the right answer, but only in certain production cases you would see that. So I guess path level evaluation is where you really see not just the answer, but the behavior of the AI agent. So I think that is also something that I found very effective. And then really the third part is the monitoring part, where observability platform, if you're talking in context of SaaS, it's really a cost controlling per tenant or monitoring per tenant. I would also say that stepwise budgeting or stepwise monitoring is because you're also looking at the whole, but you also want to look at the sum of all parts or like parts of all sums.
And I think that's another element of the decision for whether you use a managed API only service for the model versus run it yourself is because of the ability to expose and act upon the log probability scores of the outputs to be able to see, oh, well, the model phrased this very confidently, but the log probability is actually fairly low. So I'm going to take a second pass to evaluate this output versus if it's an API response, you lose that insight into the inner workings of the model to determine what is its confidence score. And I'm wondering how you're seeing teams think about that as part of the overall equation of where and how to run these models and how to hook into some of those confidence metrics that the model itself generates.
Absolutely. So, one thing that I find more effective is monitoring at the model level, but also at the workflow level. Because what you're monitoring at the model level is just one part of the workflow. So, if this model, so 5.1 was giving me this particular summary, and this is the prompt that worked with 5.1, but after 5.2 the same prompt doesn't work, so nothing has changed, but still things have changed drastically, like those kind of errors. So I think when we monitor at the model level and when you write evaluations, you basically write it at the unit level. So I think of model level validations as unit level test, and workflow level test as more end-to-end system test or integration test. So I think that's a very rough analogy, but I think definitely monitoring models output and behavior at an individual step level, but then also seeing it holistically, that this model output was supposed to return me summary such that next agent or this tool was supposed to pass it to this next API, so I guess that's the whole flow where evals can really help you understand what part of the equation broke, why, and what kind of effect model changes have. Do we need to version our models? So I think that is also one more effective strategy, that teams are becoming more and more aware that model upgrade may or may not help. So I think by default upgrading to model might not be a good strategy until you have really solid tests. So I think definitely running the model changes in a sandbox environment first, using things like canary deployment to slowly graduate the new model to your existing code bases, just to do this in a very controlled and in a very graduated fashion.
Going back to the multi-tenant nature of these SaaS platforms, that also brings up the question of attribution and identity management for these autonomous actors. And I'm wondering how you're seeing the platform owners of these SaaS systems think about the types of additional security controls and identity frameworks that they need to have in place to be able to allow these agents to operate on behalf of the various customers and manage their either isolation within tenant boundaries or how to think about whether and when they can operate across tenant boundaries, because of the fact that one of the core promises of these SaaS systems is that each tenant will only ever be able to access their own resources and never be able to span across them.
Yes, absolutely. I think some of the existing techniques AI agents have to abide by, and some of the newer challenges that come with AI agent themselves. So when I think about existing techniques, I would say that tenant isolation is something that continues to be supported by a successful AI agent, and the tenant isolation we are talking about is through the entire workflow of the AI agent. So think in terms of memory. There should be a tenant isolation at the memory level, at the tool access level, at the database level, at the vector database level. So I think an agent should always be able to track on whose tenant the agent is taking an action, because this is also needed for audit purposes. In most of the SaaS businesses, you need to be able to see who ran what, which tenant ran what in their isolated environment, what was the role agent had, because an agent doesn't have an identity of itself when it runs for SaaS. It is run for a tenant and for a user. Another technique is definitely about RBAC, role-based access control. That also continues to be highly relevant in context of AI agent still. An AI agent should only be able to run the feature set or responsibilities that the role that has been given to it allows, and not outside of this. So I think at a high level, I think the tenant scoping, and at the middle layer I see the role scoping, and really at the bottom layer is the user scoping. So I think that framework still holds true. Some of the newer challenges with AI agents are that of interoperability, and I would think MCP, because an agent is calling tools, but I think we really want to make sure that there are enough guardrails in place such that accidentally an AI agent doesn't get access to across tenanted information while it's calling tools. So I think tool boundaries are something to really watch out for, and that's why guardrails become very effective in terms of who is the agent calling, what tools are they calling, and are they still maintaining the scope.
And in your work of building these SaaS platforms, incorporating agentic capabilities, working with other companies that are going through that same journey, what are some of the most interesting or innovative or unexpected ways that you've seen these agentic capabilities incorporated into SaaS products?
Absolutely. I mean, I think it goes without saying that the most innovative ones I've seen are not the most autonomous ones. So I not seeing that teams are really deriving value by making them truly autonomous. There is almost always a human in the loop layer for critical business use cases. There is confidence scoring. So I think those things are there for sure. Some of the interesting ways I have seen is, like one particular implementation I've seen where the entire multi-agent framework is deployed on a MCP server, and that multi-agent solution has become client agnostics, and that backend is served via various front end. So the product has its own front end, but the backend product can also be served via standard MCP client like Claude. So I think that was very interesting to me, because we have always talked about decoupling UI from the backend. But I think AI agents, especially the MCP layer, is facilitating that in very interesting ways. So using a standard MCP client like Claude and others, you can basically interact. This was a chatbot. This was a Salon-based product, and with a standard Claude UI, you can actually talk to the AI agent, which is basically master orchestrated multi-agent orchestration system, and you can basically ask when is the salon opening, when is the salon closing, and all sorts of things, which I think was very cool and very effective. Some of the other things I've seen, and I'm sure like these are not as unique, but I feel they're very effective, is agents as code. So in order to really use and really make data analyst life easy. Agents generate code on the fly using Panda libraries, using Python, and then you can really analyze data on the fly. What I like about these agents is that because it's non-deterministic code, it is not good for shipping production unless you really harness that with evals, guardrails, but it makes for a very useful use case when it comes to just analyzing data. So I see this code is like use and throw code, but nonetheless very valuable, And then one last implementation I would talk about is that we know that B2B SaaS and enterprise are mostly experimenting and also deploying to some extent multi-agent systems, but these are very complex and these are usually high latency, high cost solutions. The more intelligent an AI agent is, the more costly and high latency behavior that shows. So one of the workaround I've seen is that where some teams have used agents as tools. So they have just one planner agent which has access to multiple tools, but one of the tools or maybe multiple tools are agents. So this way you avoid the complexity of a multi-agent system, yet you can capture the value of a multi-agent systems. So I think that was really interesting and cool.
And in your experience of working in this space and helping to bring agentic features to SaaS platforms, what are some of the most interesting or unexpected or challenging lessons that you've learned personally?
I think moral changes, they fail silently. I think this is something that most of us have felt the pain of it. So I think this is something that we want to upgrade to new models because new models they come with great capabilities, when it comes to frontier models. But it is still very brittle and like one small moral tweak. This is the scenario that I shared with you where nothing changes but everything changes for bad because your workflow is still the same, but like you went from 5 to 5.1, 5.1 to 5.2, and your prompt is not working anymore. Your RAG instructions, they need to be fine-tuned more. So I think that is keeps on coming. And really the strategy is relying heavily on evals and also coming up with a policy on when to deploy newer models. And I think there is a whole CI/CD paradigm about it. So I guess that's something that I found interesting. I would also say that one thing that has taken even great teams aback is the silent retries that I also mentioned in one of the previous discussions we were having. This is the behavior when the output looks correct. It's not in functionality of the agent you're able to detect problem, but it's in the behavior of the agent. And by that I mean, did it really take the shortest path to answering your question, or did it really go to a lot of retries, a lot of to and fro. So I guess just path level monitoring of an agent is what I feel is the trickiest, because in some small use cases on pilot you won't catch it because your evals are just looking at the right data functionally and it is giving you that. But it really comes down to production where suddenly you see unexplained latency. And I think that's why path based evaluations are really the most advanced and more sophisticated, which can prevent such, like surprises on production.
And we touched on this a few times, but what are the situations where you would strongly advise against the adoption of agentic behaviors for a SaaS platform?
Yeah, I mean, as we were talking about that, I will stress on that AI agents are non-deterministic, yet in a SaaS context, they are expected to display deterministic behavior, and it needs a lot of harnessing, a lot of discipline around that. It is doable, and teams are successfully doing that, but I don't think we should over-engineer. So as we were talking about, there are some use cases, some very standard use cases where Gen AI, predictive AI, your classical ML, they will continue to make a lot of sense and they will completely deliver on the expected ROI. For AI agent, there has to be really use case where we are talking about multi-step, repetitive step. They should be very action oriented. If you want to explore something, or you want a creative output, that's where Janai may be a better solution. So I think those still continue to be my guidelines on before we start on any agentic adoption. We should really map our AI ecosystem and really see for ourselves, like we have this complex AI ecosystem where this will be solved by classical ML, this will be solved by Gen AI. And these are the opportunities where I think we can adopt AI agents.
And as the capabilities of these models continue to improve, as we gain more established patterns and practices around how to build agentic systems and how to manage them effectively in production contexts, what are some of the predictions that you have as far as the role that these agentic systems are going to play in the future of SaaS products? Or are SaaS products merely going to fade away in favor of agentic only capabilities?
Yeah, I'm aware that this is a hotly debated topic over the LinkedIn, and I guess various LinkedIn influencers have opined on this. And there's a spectrum of, I would say there are different schools of thought, So I guess one school of thought is that SaaS is dead, and other school of thought is that no, SaaS is here to stay. And really, the third school of thought, which is my own thought, is that I think in the short term future, and I'm talking about next 2 or 3 years, we are going to see SaaS that has AI agent strongly embedded. So both Gen AI and agentic AI strongly embedded in the workflows. So I think that's how I see the industry unfold. And the reason is simple. See, the reason why I think SaaS, it's very hard to completely take over SaaS is that the moral of the SaaS is that you have to deliver predictability, reliability, in a certain repetitive fashion. And AI being non-deterministic makes it very hard, even now with all the infrastructure and all the support and all the wisdom that we have learned after navigating this, like these products for a few years. It's not at a place where you can really take over the deterministic form of SaaS. So the way I see it is a very strong hybrid model. And first and foremost, we will see impact on the pricing model itself. So, and we kind of talked about that, but like one of the disruption I see, which is already happening, is that SaaS pricing has become more complex and more layered. So if I look at products like Lovable, or similar products, there is a SaaS seat pricing plus you have credit usage as well. Or I think that will further come down to outcome based pricing, because credit usage is not driving a lot of customer satisfaction because you have used your credit, but you have to tweak the prompt so many times that you lost all your credit. So I think that's really one disruption I see. Second disruption I see is AI agents playing a significant role in customer onboarding, which is one of the core flows. So I see a lot of agentic onboarding, and I'm really excited about that because traditional SaaS boarding was very template heavy. You install an app, they will ask you a bunch of questions. You have to toggle yes, no, yes, no. I really feel that with AI agentic and GenAI capabilities, we are talking about a seamless, let's say, voice onboarding, or a text onboarding where AI is intelligent enough to kind of extract your configuration, and you don't have to go with that like 10, 20, 30 step 5 on onboarding that we are so used to in SaaS world. So I feel in nutshell that AI and AI agents in particular are going to empower SaaS by taking away the workflow complexities, making UI more visually appealing, less template heavy, less configuration heavy, and with an interesting mix of pricing models that we are already seeing.
Are there any other aspects of bringing agentic capabilities into SaaS systems, the overall economy of SaaS and the impacts of AI on that, or just your own experience of working in the space that we didn't discuss yet that you'd like to cover before we close out the show?
I mean, I think we have talked about most of it. Thanks for the great questions and thoughtful questions that you have asked me. But I think one thing I would like to say is that I think there are still some gaps in the industry, And I guess there are 2 or 3 things which will help our industry as a whole that make AI adoption easier and successful. It's not a good place to be where leading research studies are publishing that 95% of Gen AI pilots fail, or by 2027 50% of agentic AI pilots will fail. I think what we need is there are ways to make agent work on complex production environment, but it needs a lot of plumbing, it needs a lot of discipline and all the strategies that we have talked about. And I'm hoping that more and more platforms will come which will productize this approach. It doesn't have to live in minds of few leaders or few researchers who have figured this out. So I'm already seeing a lot of job made easy by observability platforms where you can track costs, where you can track latency, but estimation still continues to be a challenge. We talk a little about how do we estimate, because that's the first step. And I think if there are more and more products that can make it easier for leaders to estimate and to ensure that this project is going to return the ROI that business expects, I think that will go a long way. So I think that is definitely something. I would also say that interoperability between agent is still being figured out. Now there are new protocols, like A2A is not new anymore, but there is a payment protocol as well that has come. But I think a lot of work needs to be done, and it will happen, because things are so new that we are still living in a relatively nascent world when it comes to interoperability that is going to really enable that enterprise level success of AI agentic solutions on production. So I think those are definitely two things where I guess one last thing is when it comes to scalability, because if you're talking about production and enterprise scale, we have to think about what kind of AI infra exists. And I guess one thing that is becoming very apparent is that our regular AI infra tools to scale, auto scalings, they are not very friendly towards AI native solutions. I mean, you can, of course, use a Lambda to scale. You can, of course, containerize and put your AI agents in Dockers and deploy that on EC2 with auto scaling. AI agents need a lot of memory, and in most situations we see timeout. So I think one more improvement that I'm hoping to see in the AI infra industry is that ability to have AI agents scale more seamlessly. So I think those are the top 2 or 3 things that are in my mind that still need to be solved for.
Well, for anybody who wants to get in touch with you and follow along with the work that you're doing, I'll have you add your preferred contact information to the show notes. And as the final question, I'd like to get your perspective on what you see as being the biggest gaps in the tooling, technology, or human training that's available for AI systems today.
Absolutely. So I think I kind of talked about the gaps and challenges in the previous discussion, but I think human training, yes. I think this also goes back to why I feel that SaaS cannot be completely overtaken by agents, is because there is a real lack of resources. There is a real lack of talent when it comes to leadership or even engineers who are navigating this transition. And it is ironic, that there are so many AI native startups in past 2 years, but there is not enough talent to supply that, because there are limited people with research background. And if you're really looking for industry experts on this, I think we need to do more trainings. And I know that there are trainings provided by Deep Learning, Coursera, Udemy, Maven. I'm a big part of those communities as well, and I definitely keep myself updated. But I'm hoping that training becomes more democratized, because that's what we need. Because most of the startups I talk to, they're trying to figure out, they have a prototype but they don't have the confidence to take it to production, and that shows me that there's a real gap on production grade skills. And I'm hoping that there are more and more courses, more and more leaders, they offer mentoring to peer leaders and engineers who can really navigate the shift.
All right. Well, thank you very much for taking the time today to join me and share the work that you've been doing on this challenge of bringing agentic capabilities into SaaS platforms and the economics and technical challenges associated with that. So I appreciate all the time and energy you're putting into helping other companies address that challenge and modernize at the rapid pace that things are changing. So thank you again for that, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you, Tobias, so much. And that was such a great conversation.
Thank you for listening. Don't forget to check out our other shows. The Data Engineering Podcast covers the latest on modern data management, and Podcast.init covers the Python language, its community, and the innovative ways it is being used. Visit the site to subscribe to the show, sign up for the mailing list, and read the show notes. And if you've learned something or tried out a project from the show, then tell us about it. Email hosts at aiengineeringpodcast.com with your story.